You're eating less. You're trying to stay disciplined. You might even be tracking your calories every single day. And yet, when you step on the scale or look in the mirror, the body fat doesn't seem to move. This is where a lot of people start to feel frustrated. Because everything they've heard tells them that if you're in a calorie deficit, fat loss should happen automatically. Eat fewer calories than your body burns, and the weight should come off. In theory, that rule still holds true. But real human metabolism is rarely that simple. There are countless people who swear they are eating less, training harder, and still feel stuck in the exact same place. What's interesting is that the issue often isn't a lack of effort. In many cases, it's a handful of hidden factors quietly working against you. Small things that seem harmless on the surface, but over time, they can completely stall fat loss. And once you understand these factors, the entire picture starts to make a lot more sense. Because sometimes the reason fat loss isn't happening has nothing to do with willpower at all. Before going deeper into the specific reasons, it's important to clear up something that often gets misunderstood in the world of fat loss and metabolism. The principle of a calorie deficit is still fundamentally true. If your body burns more energy than you consume, over time weight should come down. That part of the science hasn't changed. But the human body isn't a simple calculator where calories go in. Calories go out. And everything behaves perfectly on schedule. Your metabolism is influenced by hormones, sleep quality, stress levels, food quality, muscle activity, and even how frequently you eat during the day. Two people could both be eating around 500 calories a day. Yet their bodies may respond very differently depending on these factors. One person might steadily burn fat, while the other feels like their progress has completely stalled. That's why when people say, "I'm in a calorie deficit but nothing is happening," the real explanation usually lies in the details. And the first reason this happens is actually far more common than most people realize. The first possibility, and honestly the most common one, is surprisingly simple. You may not actually be in a calorie deficit at all. Now that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong intentionally. In fact, most people who struggle with fat loss are genuinely trying to eat less. But small things add up quickly throughout the day. A little extra salad dressing here, a handful of almonds there, a splash of cream in coffee, or a few bites of snacks while cooking dinner. None of those things seem like a big deal individually, but together they can quietly add hundreds of calories. And here's something that makes this even trickier. Food labels in the United States are legally allowed to have up to a 20% margin of error. That means a meal labeled as 200 calories could realistically be closer to 240. When your goal is to create a modest calorie deficit for fat loss, that difference alone can completely erase it. So while calorie deficit remains the foundation of weight loss, many people unknowingly cancel it out through small, invisible calories scattered throughout the day. Now, let's assume you truly are eating fewer calories and a real calorie deficit exists. Even then, there's another possibility that catches many people off guard. Your body might be losing muscle instead of burning fat. A calorie deficit simply means the body needs to pull energy from somewhere, but it doesn't automatically choose body fat as the fuel source. If muscle isn't being used regularly or stimulated through activity, the body may decide that muscle tissue is the easiest place to pull energy from. There's an old saying in physiology that still holds true. If you don't use it, you lose it. When someone cuts calories aggressively but becomes more sedentary, muscle can gradually break down. The scale may drop, but the mirror tells a different story. The body can actually appear softer because muscle mass is decreasing while body fat remains relatively stubborn. This is why combining a moderate calorie deficit with regular movement, resistance training, and sufficient protein intake becomes so important. It signals to the body that muscle is valuable and fat should be the fuel source instead. There's another layer to fat loss that often gets overlooked, and it has nothing to do with how many calories you're eating. It's about what those calories are actually made of. A diet can technically be low in calories but still be lacking essential micronutrients like vitamins, minerals, and trace elements your body needs to function properly. When those nutrients are missing, the body has a surprisingly intelligent way of responding. It increases hunger signals and cravings. What many people interpret as a lack of discipline is sometimes just the body trying to correct a deficiency. Your body is essentially saying, "I'm still missing something important." Highly processed foods make this problem worse. They can be dense in calories but extremely poor in real nutrition. So someone might hit their calorie target but still feel unsatisfied and end up snacking more later. Over time, those additional cravings can quietly increase calorie intake enough to stall fat loss. And sometimes the problem isn't even what you're eating, it's how frequently you're eating throughout the day. Another factor that often slows down fat loss has less to do with the amount of food and more to do with how frequently food is entering your system. Many people today fall into the habit of eating almost non-stop throughout the day. A quick breakfast, a snack mid-morning, lunch, another snack in the afternoon, something small after dinner, and sometimes even late-night bites. Individually, none of these meals seem excessive. But physiologically, something important is happening every time you eat. Insulin rise. Insulin's job is to help move nutrients into cells, which is essential. But when insulin is elevated, the body is much less likely to release stored fat for energy. Fat burning tends to happen most efficiently between meals. When insulin levels have time to drop and other hormones begin signaling the body to mobilize stored energy. If the body never gets those natural gaps because food is constantly arriving, it spends most of the day in storage mode instead of burning mode. And interestingly enough, one habit people often believe helps dieting can quietly reverse progress even faster. There's another habit that often feels like a reward during dieting. But metabolically, it can quietly undo a lot of progress. The classic cheat meal. On the surface, it seems harmless. After a week of eating clean and maintaining a calorie deficit, one big meal shouldn't matter that much. Right? The problem is that fat loss changes the math inside your body. As you lose weight, your metabolism naturally adapts and your body begins burning fewer calories per day. So imagine someone whose metabolism originally burned around 2,000 calories daily. A cheat meal of 2,500 calories would create a surplus of about 500 calories. But after losing weight, that same person's metabolism might now burn closer to 1,500 calories per day. Suddenly, the exact same cheat meal creates a much larger surplus. What once slowed progress slightly can now completely erase the deficit for the entire week. And beyond calories alone, very large meals can trigger hormonal swings and inflammation that make the body temporarily hold onto water and energy. But sometimes the real obstacle isn't food at all. It's how the body responds to stress. At first glance, working harder should accelerate fat loss. Eat less. Train more. Push the body harder every day. That seems logical. But physiology doesn't always respond the way we expect. A calorie deficit already places the body under a form of stress. When intense workouts, long work hours, lack of sleep, and daily life pressure get added on top of that deficit, the body can shift into a prolonged stress response. Stress hormones like cortisol begin to rise, and over time that can affect appetite, recovery, and even how the body partitions energy between muscle and fat. Sleep becomes one of the biggest hidden levers here. When sleep quality drops, studies have shown that the body may break down more muscle tissue and burn less fat for energy. Poor sleep can also increase cravings for high-calorie foods the next day. So even if someone is technically in a calorie deficit, chronic stress and sleep deprivation can quietly interfere with the fat loss process. And there's another common mistake that happens once people start training regularly. Once people start exercising consistently, another assumption often creeps in without them realizing it. They begin to overestimate how many calories their workouts are actually burning. Fitness trackers, smartwatches, and gym machines frequently display numbers that look impressive, sometimes claiming a workout burned 400 or even 500 calories. The problem is that those numbers are often rough estimates and can easily be inflated. Resistance training, for example, is incredibly valuable for building muscle and improving metabolism. But it typically doesn't burn as many calories during the session as people expect. When someone believes they burned a large amount of energy, it becomes psychologically easier to justify eating a little more afterward. Those extra snacks can quietly eliminate the calorie deficit they worked so hard to create. Exercise absolutely supports fat loss. But its biggest benefit is improving body composition, not acting as a massive calorie-burning machine. And for some individuals, the challenge goes even deeper at the hormonal level. For some people, the challenge behind stalled fat loss goes beyond food tracking or exercise habits. It comes down to how the body manages insulin. Insulin is one of the most important hormones involved in metabolism. Its primary job is to help move nutrients, especially glucose, out of the bloodstream and into cells where they can be used or stored. But insulin also plays another role that matters during fat loss. When insulin levels remain elevated, the body becomes less likely to release stored fat from fat cells. In people who have developed some level of insulin resistance, insulin can stay higher for longer periods of time after meals. This doesn't completely override the calorie deficit principle, but it can change how the body chooses its fuel sources. In those situations, the body may rely more on carbohydrates and muscle tissue for energy, while fat loss slows down. And interestingly, there is one lifestyle factor many people overlook that can influence both metabolism and appetite. One factor that surprisingly shows up again and again in metabolic research is vitamin D levels and regular sunlight exposure. Vitamin D plays roles in immune function, mood regulation, and metabolic signaling throughout the body. Interestingly, studies often find that individuals with higher levels of body fat also tend to have lower circulating vitamin D levels. One explanation is that vitamin D can become stored inside fat tissue, which means less of it remains available in the bloodstream. Low vitamin D has also been associated with changes in appetite and mood. And those two things strongly influence eating behavior. When mood drops, cravings for high-calorie comfort foods often rise. Something as simple as regular sunlight exposure can help support vitamin D levels and improve overall metabolic health. It may seem like a small factor, but sometimes small biological signals can quietly shape our daily habits. And when you step back and look at all these pieces together, a much clearer picture of fat loss begins to emerge. So if you've ever felt like you were doing everything right, eating less, trying to exercise more, and still watching fat loss move painfully slow, you're not alone. The reality is that fat loss is rarely controlled by a single variable. A calorie deficit still matters. But the way your body responds to that deficit depends on a much bigger picture. Hidden calories, muscle loss, nutrient deficiencies, constant snacking, cheat meals, stress, poor sleep, overestimating workouts, insulin resistance, and even something as simple as sunlight exposure can all influence the outcome. When those pieces start lining up correctly, the body often responds in a completely different way. Fat loss becomes smoother, energy improves, and the process finally begins to feel sustainable. And sometimes the biggest breakthrough isn't eating dramatically less, it's simply understanding how the body actually works.